Hello, welcome back to my studio. Today's picture is going to be a scene in a small forest in the snow. What I'm doing here is I'm wetting the paper from the top down to the horizon line, and I've masked out some trees, some shrubs, and also a little snowman in the foreground. The colours we're going to be using today is raw sienna, ultramarine blue, light red and burnt umber. I apologise for my easel wobbling there, I just bumped into it as I was putting the water on. So now I'm placing on that raw sienna from the horizon line, wet into wet, and working it up towards the top of the picture. I'd like the stronger colour of the raw sienna being down on the horizon line to create this lovely distance in this picture when it's finished. In a moment I'm going to be mixing up our two colours together, which is ultramarine blue and light red, and that's going to be mixed together to give me a purple colour. And I'm just bringing in the clouds here from the right side and over on the left side, and just bringing it in just behind the trees. This is all again wet into wet, so that as it dries within the distance. Make it a little bit stronger near the bottom. That's just to represent some little distant clouds behind the trees. Using a similar mix in a moment, I'm going to pick up a natural sea sponge using a blue, ultramarine blue, and this is all wet into wet again, and I'm just sponging in a little bit of that blue colour. Way in the distant trees these will be. As they dry, they will dry with a soft edge, not a hard edge, because it's wet into wet. You can see here it's picking up some more colour of the ultramarine blue, and in a moment I'm going to add a little bit of raw sienna to this blue to give it a green tint, and that will give you again the colour of trees and shrubs way in the distance. Just gently touching the sponge to the paper, don't have to push hard, and this is, as I say, all wet into wet. I'm picking up my brush here, and with the raw sienna and a little bit of ultramarine blue, I'm filling in some of those distant shrubs that I just masked out, and I'm just putting on those colours just over all the masking fluid. And when you take the masking fluid off, it will leave you a lovely shrub just underneath it. And just touch the paint on, don't brush it on, just use the heel of the brush and touching it. I've just left it to dry now. Just picking up some ultramarine blue now, and I'm sweeping down from the right hand side towards the centre of the picture and just drawing in the shadow of the snow. Picking up some more paint, and I'm painting over all the shrubs, all the masking fluid, over the top of the snowman, and just drawing it down on this right hand side. If you want to, you can add a little bit of light red to this colour, and it will give you like a purpley shade, which will make the snow slightly darker, so it gives the impression that it's late evening within the snow. But here I just want it sort of just as the light's going down, and people are just going to be leaving the snowman after they've built him, and they're going to be in the distance walking away. So this is early evening. Now just adding a little bit more colour over this masking fluid in the foreground here. I like to work on one side first and then come on the other side here, as you can see now, and try not to meet the colours in the middle. Try to leave a bit of white paper representing a little pathway. Using a flat edge brush, use it on the chisel edge side, so not flat, just using it as a chisel edge, drawing it down from the left into the centre here, going over all the shrubs, and the same on the right hand side as you saw me do. Just bringing that in here, just going over to the bottom of the snowman and around the side. so that when I take the masking fluid off, there'll be a shape of a snowman left standing at the base of that path. And then I'm going to let that dry in a moment. And again, if you're painting along with me, whenever I stop and let it dry, then you stop the video. You can then paint up to the level I'm at that time, and then you stop painting and start the video again and just follow along. Just finishing off this bit here with the snow, and then I'm going to pick up a colour of ultramarine blue and raw sienna, mixing them together, and it will give me a khaki kind of green colour, and then that's going over all the masking fluid that I've put on where the shrubs are. So I'm using the heel of my brush, as you can see here, and just pushing it into the masking fluid. Wherever the masking fluid is placed will stay white paper, and wherever there's no masking fluid, it will colour it the colour green. So when I take off the masking fluid, it will look like a shrub with snow sitting on top of it after a downpour of snow. It's a very good effect. So what I'm doing here is just pushing in that colour of the raw sienna and ultramarine blue. And again, as it gets closer to me, I add more blue and darken it down slightly. Again, there's no rush in any of these pictures, just take your time. This is all working wet and dry. So the paper is all dried, and now I'm just putting in this wet paint over the top of the dry paper. Just making it slightly darker here as it's closer to me, and I'm just covering all that masking fluid that I've put on the paper. Coming down on the other side now. More raw sienna in this colour as it's further in the distance, and as I say, it gets closer to me, I add a little bit more blue to it just to darken it down. Try not to use a brighter yellow because it will give it like a summer green, and because this is in the middle of the winter and the greens are very dark at that time of the year. So just use the raw sienna. This picture is taken from some woods not far from where I live. I often go for walks around there and take little sketches sometimes or photographs, and then I'll work from the pictures that I've got to create this scene. When I finish the shrubs, I'm going to leave it to dry, and then I'm going to take off the masking fluid. I left this for about half an hour before I took the masking fluid off. In a second you'll see that all the masking fluid is off, everything goes white, and you'll see those lovely shrubs that I'm doing now being covered on the top with snow. There you go. And now I'm painting in the distant trees. What I'm doing here is I'm using a mix of just raw sienna, and I paint over the tree. And what I'm doing is I'm leaving the right hand side of the tree with a little bit of white paper, and I'm just painting the left hand side of the tree with a raw sienna, and then I'm going to pick up a mixture of ultramarine blue, burnt umber, and add a little bit of raw sienna to that as well, and then I'll go over the top of the raw sienna. But at this stage right now I'm just adding in the small branches and twigs from these distant trees. Work on one tree at a time. When you're doing this, you don't get confused with where the branches are going and what branches are crossing over which trees. And this is working wet paint on dry paper. Just gently rest your hand, the heel of your hand on the paper, as I'm doing here. And the movement I'm doing is I'm not pushing at all hard with my brush. I'm just letting the hairs of the brush at the tip catch the paper. And I'm just moving my thumb and forefinger up. If you watch carefully, I'm just moving my two fingers up and down just to paint that tree, especially for the small branches. This again is just the raw sienna on this tree. On the left hand side, leaving the right hand side of the trunk and the branches with white paper. I'm not pushing hard with my brush, as I said earlier, just letting the hairs of the brush touch and just moving my finger and my thumb up and down, keeping my hand still and just moving my fingers will give you a very fine line. Just let the hairs catch. And in a moment, I'm going to mix up that darker mix, as I said earlier, with the raw sienna, burnt umber and ultramarine blue together to give me a dark mix, and it will give me the darker side of the tree trunk. Here you see I'm just doing those fine branches here, just leaning the heel of my hand on the paper and just moving my thumb and finger up and not moving my hand at all. Just zoom in here so you can see what I'm doing. You see the tree on the left there, it's got little bits of white paper showing. That represents the snow that's stuck to the tree. And here I'm doing the same thing. On the left hand side is the raw sienna going on. And on the right hand side of this tree you can see the little bits of white paper I'm leaving. And this again is the raw sienna on first. Then I put my darker mix on top of that while it's wet. And just letting the tip of the brush touch the paper very gently, no pushing, and just let it create fine, thin branches and twigs. Same thing here. The raw sienna, leaving the paper, and then the darker mix on top of that to create the darker side of the tree. And when I've done all my trees, then I'll make up a darker mix and put all the bark on, which you'll see later on. This is the darker colour going on top, leaving some of the white paper on the right hand side to represent snow that's stuck to the tree trunks. And if you look in the distance, what I did there with that sponge work, because it was wet into wet, you can see that soft edge of the trees in the back. That's a really good effect. It works really well, and it does give you distance within your pictures. And that raw sienna I've got right in the centre there, or just off centre, that darker colour, I wanted that to give you that pool of light as you go into the distance. It pulls you into your picture. And what I've got here is the light background and the dark twigs, so you've got this dark against light, which really works well. Just pull out a little bit here, zoom out, so you can see the whole picture again. and the way that that dark sits against the light background. What I'm doing here is I'm adding in some extra trees against that background, and this is a dark mix of ultramarine blue and burnt umber, lots of water, so it's a weaker colour, so it's in the distance. And I'm just adding in some tree trunks and little branches and trees that are way in the distance there. And again, as that dries, it will dry much lighter, about a third. Doing the same on this side, and just adding in some small thin twigs and branches and trees in these gaps, but way in the distance. Hopefully you're following along and enjoying this painting as much as I enjoy painting it. If there's any comments you have or any questions, just leave them in the comments below and I'll get back to you. Here I'm just adding in again the raw sienna on the one side, and then the ultramarine blue, burnt umber and the raw sienna together, and putting on the darker wash while it's wet into wet. And just picking up some fine twigs as we go. All the trees are done the same way in this case. As I get onto the bigger trees, I do something slightly different by wetting them first and working wet into wet. But these little trees at the background here, it's just wet and dry. Just adding in some fine twigs. Just filling in those spaces in between the trees. Just picking up a darker mix here. I'm painting underneath that white line on that tree. I'm going underneath the line so it looks like there's snow sitting on top of the branch. If you want to, you can use gouache paint, which is a water-based paint which is opaque, and you can use the white paint of that and add more snow to your picture. So you can put on, if you paint the branches in, you can put the white paint on top of your paint that you put on as the branches, and it looks like snow sitting on top of them if you can't leave the white paper. Or you can use acrylic paint as well, a white acrylic paint. I try to use the white paper as much as possible just to make it look more natural. Sometimes when you add gouache or acrylic paint to a picture, it kind of stands out. The whitest you can get is the white of the paper. So if you can, just leave the white paper. But there are other ways around it, as I said, with the other paint to add to it. What I'm doing here now is the trees are getting bigger. I've wet it first with water. Then I'm putting on the raw sienna. As you can see here, wet into wet. And then when I've done that and come down to where I want the tree to be, I then pick up a darker colour of the ultramarine blue and the raw sienna and the burnt umber, and putting them on top of the raw sienna, wet into wet, and that will create a lovely round tree. And this is what I would call an underpaint. So I put in all the underpainting first of all the trees, then when they're all dry, I'll make up a darker mix and then add all the bark effects. And again, leaving some of the white paper on the right hand side, looks like the snow's been blown across and stuck to the tree. Just picking up some more dark, and I'm painting underneath the white line. So that again, that represents the snow sitting on top of the branch. The picture I'm doing here took a while to do. It took the whole day. They usually take a few hours, the pictures that I do on YouTube, because I leave it to dry naturally. I don't use a hairdryer. So when I stop it and I leave it for about 20 minutes, half an hour before I go back to it. After Christmas, what I'd like to do with my YouTube channel is do something slightly different. I'd like to take you out on location with me, so you can see the places that I choose to paint and turn into a painting. The reasons why I choose it, the best places to paint, where the light's coming from. We'll start with a working sketch, and you'll follow that whole process and bring in the sketch back to the studio and turn it into a painting. And that'll either be oil, acrylic, watercolour, pastel, whatever I feel suits the picture we're doing. So hopefully you'll follow along and join with me in the new year. So it'll be a new year and a new start. And you'll see some amazing places not far from where I live that we can just turn into some amazing pieces of artwork. So let's get back to this picture. What I'm doing now is just adding in some more twigs and branches, using the raw sienna and a mixture of the ultramarine blue and burnt umber and the raw sienna to that as well, and just making some of these very fine twigs and branches. I'm doing the middle distance trees here, and these ones are wet first, and I work wet into wet. Unlike the distant trees in the background, that's just wet on dry. Here's the clean water now. Just putting it on the side of the tree, leaving some dry paper on the right hand side. So that's going to be white paper, and whatever I'm wetting here will be wet into wet, which will take on the raw sienna and the darker mixed colours of the blue and the brown. Here goes on the raw sienna, leaving the white paper, which is dry, and I'm working wet into wet, painting up the left hand side of the tree trunk, leaving the white paper as you can see. And when I've done the trunk and the branches, then I'll bring in the darker colour and put that on wet into wet, so the tree will dry as if it's a cylinder. Here comes the darker mix here with the blue, brown and a little bit of raw sienna to give it a green tint to it, and just darken down the left hand side of the trunk. Just straighten up the tree here. I'm wiping in some of the water, just taking it over the brush, just adding in this branch, and that's with the dark colour mix, and then just moving out my twigs and making the branches bigger and wider. Just blending these two colours together with the raw sienna and the burnt umber and ultramarine blue, wet into wet still. Just going to add another branch here on the left hand side, just about here. Just finish off this tree. A few more little branches and twigs. Then I'm going to go over to the other side of the trees and do the same process. Raw sienna first, leaving some white paper. Bringing up the darker colour. And again leaving some white paper. Bringing in a branch and a few twigs. Just adding a bit more colour to my brush, a little bit of water, and giving the fine twigs and branches. Wetting this one as it's closer with just clean water. And then the same process, raw sienna over the tree, leaving some white paper, and then the darker mix of the ultramarine blue and burnt umber. The paper I'm using here is cold pressed paper, 240 pounds, 300 grams. What I do when I'm filming is I stretch my paper, so I run it under water, get it very wet, lay it on a smooth surface, a wooden board, and then I tape it down with stretching tape. I then leave it to dry naturally. I usually leave my paper probably about 24 hours before painting on it. You can paint on it sooner if you want to, but as long as it's really dry, do make sure. Try not to use a hairdryer on it to force dry it, because sometimes that can damage the surface of the paper. If you are going to use a hairdryer, keep the hairdryer on a low heat or cool, and keep it a good distance away from your paper. What I'm doing here now is I'm just adding the darker colour to the raw sienna, and this is all wet into wet. I just leave it to do its own thing, adding a few more branches and twigs as I go. As I said earlier, this is all an underpaint, and when this is all dry, I then come on top with a bark and put a bark effect on. I've got this tree to do and one more, and then we get on to that process of adding the bark and then painting the snow. The picture here will make a very nice Christmas card. So what I might do is send it away and get it turned into cards. Or you can take it to your local printers and they can print it for you and turn it into cards. You can have a little message put inside it, And you can have on the back hand painted by, and it makes it more personal. Just adding in the darker paint here. I'm going to leave it to dry. Add in the bottom bit. And then work on the other tree on the other side. Wetting it with clean water as before. Work it into the roughness of the paper as it's cold press. It's got a little texture to it. And picking up the raw sienna and following the process over again. The size of the picture is 20 by 16, and that fits very nicely into a nice frame and a mount. And I'll hang it up into my studio or in the gallery. Raw sienna, ultramarine blue, and a little bit of burnt umber to give me the darker colour, and I'll just place that on top. The closer they get, the darker they get. So I'm going to darken these trees down in a moment once I've finished them. Just adding in some sort of texture onto the tree. Left it to dry. And now what I've got here is a darker mix of just ultramarine blue and burnt umber. The pictures are dry. I've got a dry brush, very carefully just pushing it against the roughness of the paper to create texture and bark on all my trees. You see it here, it's a dry brush technique, just scratching carefully. So I'm picking up some more paint, touching it to a tissue, and then just scratching in some of the darker colour over the top surface of the trees. It's catching the roughness of the paper and creating a bark effect. Once this process is done with the trees, that'll be finished. I might put the odd twig or branch in, and then we're going to get on and paint the snowman and the snow. Just more of that darker colour mix over the top of this trunk, and just work my way through all the branches and all the trunks to create that textured surface. When you pick up some paint like I just did then, don't have the brush too wet, just touch it to a little tissue, kitchen roll, kitchen towel, whatever you can use. Take off some of that moisture and then go straight back onto your picture. Same on this side. And just scratch at the surface to create a very good bark. Just the last tree here, putting on some of the bark. And then when the bark's done, I'll add a few more twigs on it. Just to fill that space in the centre and to the left and to the right of the picture. Just adding a few more little branches on. In that space in the centre. Just to fill it out. Just working out where to place them. What I'm doing here is diluting down some ultramarine blue, quite a weak colour for the distance, and where all the shrubs are, with the white snow that's sitting on top of the shrubs, I'm just painting in the shadow side of the snow with a very weak wash of ultramarine blue. Make sure the shrubs are dry completely before doing this. And this is the same colour I'm going to use with the snow on the trees. I left the white paper. Anywhere where there's white paper left for the snow, I'm just going to put a little wash of this very weak ultramarine blue. As it gets closer to me like this one, I wet it first with clean water, then add on the ultramarine blue, very weak wash. Here I'm doing the white paper, just putting a little bit of a wash of blue on the tree. Anywhere where there's white paper on the branches is now going to be coloured in with a very soft wash of ultramarine blue, just to take the starkness of the white paper off, but to give it that shadow colour. As I get closer with the shrubs and the snow sitting on top of the shrubs, I use the ultramarine blue, and then I put a little bit of the light red to it, just to give it a very subtle hint of purple. Wet the shrub and put the purple blue on top. Leaving some white paper as well, so don't cover it all in blue, just leaving some white paper. So this has all been wet into wet, using a very weak wash in the background, like here, and a stronger colour as it gets closer. Just gently washing over some water over this now, just to soften some of those hard edges. And I'm going to be on the other side in a few moments. And a little bit of light red mixing with that ultramarine blue will give you a really soft, weak wash of a purple. Wet the whole thing first, clean water. Pick up some blue and just dab it into the wet. So you're working wet into wet to give you a nice soft edge. Do keep your water clean when you're working with snow, especially. So I've got clean water here, so what I do is I wet with clean water like this, and then bring in the blue colour with a little bit of light red to it to give it that purple shadow, and then I just then paint it wet into wet and soften the edges. I'm picking up some here, shadow on the snow, on the trunks of the trees, and just give it that nice shadow colour. It's important to keep palettes clean and also your water clean. If you put more than 3 colours together, it creates quite a muddy colour, and you lose the vibrance of these lovely watercolours. So do keep a palette clean and your water. I'm now putting in some clean water here and here, picking up some of the colour of the shadow snow colour, which is the blue and the red, very weak, and just putting that wet into wet so it will dry very light. Picking up some more green here, And I'm going to put in just a little bit more green at the back here to darken down some of these shrubs. A little bit over here, just balancing up those colours. Give the brush a wash, pick up some blue and drop that shadow colour in at the back there. In a moment I'm going to zoom in, like here. We're going to look at this snowman. Clean water, wet one side of the snowman with just clean water. Pick up that blue and light red and paint on one half of the snowman, wet into wet, as you can see here. Then pick up some clean water and just wet the other side even more, so it then draws the colour across and fill up the snowman. Just tease the colours in between the wet. Create this lovely snowman shape. Lifting off some of the colour with a dry brush. Putting in some shadow where the snowman's standing. Just some darker bits to make it look like little footprints around where people have been making this wonderful snowman. Just adding in some darker colours around the snowman with the ultramarine blue and burnt umber to give me a grey colour. So there's no purple in this, there's no red in this colour, it's just a brown and blue. Just dampening down the edging so I don't get a hard edge in there with the snowman and making him nice and round. Let him dry, and then I'm putting in 2 little twigs for his arms, and this colour is ultramarine blue and burnt umber. Which is the same colour I use for putting his eyes and his mouth in. I'll zoom in a moment so you can see what I've done. So there's the 2 eyes, going around for the mouth. Then I'm going to use a little bit of the raw sienna in a moment and the light red. There we go, zooming in for his nose. So the raw sienna and light red gives you an orangey colour for the carrot. And there's our little snowman. Just zooming out here now. And at the back I'm going to be painting in 3 people. Painting in a carrot shape in blue, and that's going to be the child, so quite small. That's a part of him, just add more to his legs to make him slightly bigger. Just making this little carrot shape, which is going to be a small child. Just making his legs a little longer there. Picking up a red, a light red for the coat of a bigger carrot here, which is going to be one of the parents. Just get them to hold hands. Picking up a darker colour now and adding in the legs. Making them slightly taller. Placing the head on. Clean my brush, pick up another colour. Add the blue to the child's legs, extending them slightly. Putting their hands together so they're holding hands. Give the brush a wash, pick up another colour. Start off with a carrot shape, so the round of the shoulders, drawing it downwards, stopping halfway down for the coat. Putting the arms down and around. Putting a darker cut over the legs. And finishing that shape off. Giving the brush a wash, picking up a flesh colour of a very weak red, light red, placing in the heads, and putting in the hair and the face here. Just a few little adjustments, putting in shadows of arms. There we go. Putting in a shadow. You can see the two parents looking down at the child. They've just had lots of fun building that lovely snowman. I'd like to wish you all a Merry Christmas, and I hope you have a wonderful time and a lovely New Year. And I'll see you when we get back. Hope you enjoyed watching this video. I did like painting this one, and I'll see you all in the new year. I'm Brian Davenport. Thank you for watching.